Hi, I'm Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Crate's Go Out and Sketch a De la Mina Lilac Verbena instructional video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sketch a verbena by applying what you learned with your step-by-step lesson. First, collect all your materials and make sure they're ready to go. Remember, this is just a sketch. Don't get too caught up with the details and enjoy your time observing nature. So first you want to use a pencil to get a light rough sketch of the plant. A lot like with the step-by-step when you transferred the image, getting a initial image onto the page using light marks. And you can do this one of two ways. You can either use shapes to draw it a little bit bigger than the actual plant, or you can trace it right on to your page. And I think I want to put there. You'll want to determine what parts of the plant you want to sketch first as well. And then you figure out where you want it on the page. And I think I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and trace this and do it at the same size. Our step-by-step was done at a larger size, so this will probably turn out a little bit different from that. And I'm just going to draw a line for where the leaves are. This is on the bracts, I believe. And then the stem. If you pinch right here, when these flowers all fall off, it will encourage the plant to keep flowering more. And I'm just going to draw little shapes and trace, getting an idea of the sizing and positions of the different flower parts. So I have just this really rough sketch. And then what I'll do is I'll move that and then just start drawing in the different flower parts onto my sketch. The initial lines might be a little bit bigger, a little different, so you can just make some slightly darker marks. And see, this was more at this angle rather than this angle, so it's going to be a little different. So I could redraw that, or I could just kind of go with this. And I think I'll just go with it. And I'm going to start here by drawing some circles for where the flowers are. So there's a flower there, there's a flower here, and then there's a flower coming out right here. And then there's the spiky area in the middle. And then another flower, kind of the tube coming right here and then ending the petals here. And there's one in the back just kind of peeking out. And then one on the side as well. So I guess I'll go ahead and draw that in. So I have some slightly darker marks to indicate where those flower parts are. And I'm going to continue to work with the flowers and do the stem and the leaves later. Because every time I move my head, it basically moves the position of the flowers. It's going to look a little different. So since I'm working on it right now, I'm going to just continue. And I'm just going to start adding some of the details. So pick a flower that you'd like to start with. I just picked this one. And I'm drawing in some of those flower details. And it might be a little bit bigger than the actual flower, and that's totally fine. This is just a sketch. I'm not trying to get an exact representation, just an approximate representation. So I'm just taking it, I'm just kind of putting every little petal in as an individual part and just working on that. And then whatever it touches, I start working on the next one to keep it the same in that relation, the size and the position, as best I can. And see, I'm not getting really exact. This is just real fast and approximate. They don't need to be exact at all. And I might actually add the little circles so I don't forget that there is the little dark area in the middle for the tube. And then I'm going to work on this back flower. Maybe I need that petal to be a little longer, so I'm changing that. And drawing the little tube down. It's going to be a different position because this was actually this flower over here, I think, when I was tracing it. And then there's the flower in the back here, some petals peeking out behind the stem there. The little tube. And let's see, keep moving my head a lot. So it's making it change just a little bit. So just doing the best I can here. It looks a little bit too wide. So if you make mistakes that you really don't like and it might confuse you, just go ahead and erase them. It's totally fine. This is just a sketch. It does not need to be perfect. And then I have this last flower, which I think would not quite go out quite that far. And I think the easiest way to tell where it would be is in relation to this back flower and the spikes. So I'm going to go ahead and draw those first. So I'm going to just kind of draw in the spikes using lines in the shape I drew for the spike. And then I'm going to start drawing in these little petals in relation to where I see them to the spike. This little flower head. And hopefully you're sketching this flower outside. I love sketching outside. The noise can make it hard for someone to understand what's going on in a video, and it's very unpredictable, which is not very good for demonstrating. But it is a lot more fun to sketch outside. And so I finished this flower cluster here, this blossom inflorescence, so many different names for it. And when I can't really tell the difference between these leaves and other leaves, so in order to help myself so I don't have to worry, like it's just hard to see, they just kind of blend together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put my page up there so I can see them better. And then I'm going to draw them, because that separates them visually from the rest of the leaves. And not being real exact, not worrying about getting my lines too straight, just kind of getting it on the page. It is just a sketch, so I'm just doing it quick and a little messy. Try to make sure I get in a position where I can separate this from the back and still get on my page here. these in first. Still using some lines to help me figure out where the leaves belong. And I'm not being super exact again about how many of these serrated edges there are, just kind of adding some in. It's from different vantage points or different viewpoint. I can't actually see them all the time. So add this in. And afterwards you can make notes about how many are actually there. You can count it, you can make any kind of observations, how many flowers were actually on this. And you could even take a flower off and draw it on the side if you wanted to. You can dissect the flower and draw it. You can use a magnifying glass and look at it closer. There are so many options. And I'm just showing you a quick, simple version, but this is your sketch, so you should do whatever you like. In order to get the direction of a leaf, it's easiest to draw. I find it easiest to draw a line first and then follow that line. So that's pretty good for a sketch of this. So now I'm going to add a bud. Try to pick a bud that's similar to the bud in our reference image. Again, this was blown up when a lot bigger than the actual size of the plant, so it's going to end up looking a little different, but you can see it's very similar. And I'm just gonna go ahead and do what I did before and draw a little line and kind of approximate the size by tracing kind of around where it would be, kind of like I'm drawing the shadow of the plant onto the paper. And I think I'll just draw these top leaves. And the easiest thing to do is just to kind of move it to the side and then draw it from there. And of course the perspective is going to change every time I move, so it's not going to be exact, so don't get too caught up with exact accuracy. This is just a fun little sketch. I'm trying not to hurt the plant while I'm doing this. Although it won't be detrimental to the plant if I trim part of it off or I break it. We'll just grow another stem. Make sure not to hold it completely flat against your paper so you get the idea of how the plant is sitting. So real rough. I'm not being very exact at all, obviously, with sizing and keeping my lines super straight or the exact same thickness. This is just a sketch. I'm just getting a rough idea of this plant on. I'm going to fine tune it a little bit with my ink lines at the end, but this is just a quick idea sketch. Should not take very long. If you decide to do a longer sketch, you can. But I think I've included the elements I want to. And now I'm, just for consistency, going to go ahead and write the scientific name and common name in there as well. And these flowers, they really want to grow. They're really growing this direction. So I might actually keep it like this to properly represent how these flowers, the direction these flowers are growing. I believe they're growing towards the sun. And that's another thing you can note in the white spaces. You can make any kind of observations you have about the day, how you were feeling, maybe the noises you were hearing, the weather, whatever you like. This is your sketch. And so I'm going to just, for consistency, write in the common name and the scientific name. And now I'll go ahead and move on to adding some paint. So I've revived my paints with a little bit of water. These are already mixed for the step-by-step painting lessons for the verbena. And I also have my paints on the side, the raw umber, the permanent red, sap green, and Payne's gray. Just in case I need something that's more vibrant or I run out of paint and I need to remix it. And I'm going to paint this the same way I painted the step-by-step in general. I might change it just a little bit. I'm gonna pick up a little bit of the very light green color, adding a little bit more water there, testing it out on my test paper here. Looks pretty good. Move that to the side. And then I'm going to add it to all of the green areas. And I'm going to start with this so I don't smudge it, this bottom flower. I'm going to start with this top flower. And I'm going to pull over a little bud here. And everything is green except for this little spiky part in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a full layer of green over the whole thing. Except for the spiky area. See, there's also some green on the outside a little bit. So I'll put those into right at the edge of the bud. And I'm just going to fill in my drawing. These lines I've already drawn. And if I add extra, that's fine. I'm just going to do this in a fast fashion and get out of the lines. That's okay too. Not a big deal. And now I'm going to do the same with this, and I'm going to start with the green right about in this area here in my drawing. There's a little bit coming down in there and not really staying in the lines, not being super accurate. Celebrating mistakes. Mistakes are good. Add a little bit of character to your painting. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just filling in my drawing with this color. I'm going to clean off my brush, and then I'm going to pick up the wettest, lightest, least concentrated version of the violet. I'm going to test it on my paper, and it looks a little bit too dark still. I'm going to add some more water in my palette. Maybe a little bit more. Even more, it's so strange. Very concentrated. That looks pretty good. Maybe I need to mix new paint. So I'm gonna go ahead and just remix this color. Maybe something about it sitting there changed it a little bit. Want to make sure it looks right, so I'm going to go ahead and mix it. So I'm going to take 3 drops of the permanent red, and 2 drops of the Payne's gray. Always remember to shake your paint to make sure its pigment is fully incorporated and that you're getting the right concentration of that color. Go ahead and just add some water to the side. And a little bit more because I'm getting it really light and wet. Now, initially in my palette that looks about the same. I'm guessing it'll behave a little different since it's fresh. It's very dark still. Adding more water. And that looks more vibrant, so I'm not exactly sure why, but the paint pigment separated in a way didn't quite keep the same kind of vibrancy as original. So there's another reason why you might want to. You can see the difference in the vibrancy. It just turned out a bit more vibrant and it's lighter than when I revived it, so a little strange. And the paint pigments must have separated a bit, but that looks a lot better. And hopefully you can see that on the camera as well. So put those to the side and use that lightest, wettest color to paint in these flower petals. The tubes have purple in them too, so I went ahead and painted those. But this bud is more of that rusty red color. So next I'm just going to take the drier, darker version of the green color and dab it on my paper to test it. Maybe a little bit darker. I want to make sure it has a lot of contrast when I put it on my paper. And again, I'm going to start with make sure this is dry by lightly dabbing it. And I'm going to start with this upper image with the bud. And basically, I'm just going to add it in the shadowed areas, just keeping some of the areas light and keeping some of the areas dark. So just kind of like one edge. As you can see, there's some darker areas in there. And so I'm just kind of going to go on some edges and leaving some a little lighter, preserving that to create a little bit of contrast and dimension to the painting in this image. I'm not being super exact, I'm just getting it in there just to create some contrast. I'm not worrying too much about placement or getting it exactly like the flower in front of me. Just doing a quick study of this. Maybe just a tiny bit more. I'm gonna do the same thing here. As you can see, might be easier to see here that all of the dark areas are kind of a shadow on the stem itself, so you can see it's along the bottom here and a little bit on the edge and the top, but we're not going to get into that too much, so just mostly on this bottom edge and then the inside edges of those leaves and the very center. So I'm going to do that to my image here, not worrying too much about exact placement, and if I don't preserve all of the enough green, light green, it's going to be just fine. If it gets out of the lines, that's also fine. And make sure to pick up paint whenever you need it. Dab it off onto your towel so you don't have too much water or too much paint before applying it to your paper. I'm just going to add it to the center of these leaves. Just a real rough representation of this plant. Does not need to be exact again. And see if there's any other green in this. Maybe a little bit here going into this flower here, and then a tiny bit here, but looks like that's pretty much it. maybe a little bit in this middle area. So I'm just put a tiny bit in there as well. I'm cleaning off my brush on my towel. I'm just going to add a little bit of this buff color to the center of the flowers, just a tiny bit, to these little circular areas. So on just the ones that I kind of forward facing in my image. Cleaning off my brush again. Don't forget to clean off your brush between colors so that they don't end up all being brown or the wrong color in general. Then I'm going to pick up a little bit more of this violet color. And I'm going to get a little bit of water in it. I'm just going to try to get the right concentration here. So I don't want it to be super dark because obviously these flowers aren't super dark. They're really still quite light in even the dark areas. But I still want it to show up. So I think that that's about the right color. After testing it out a little bit, I think that that works. And it's not going to be the same, but it's close enough. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that like I see then the flowers. So I'm just keeping some of that lighter color showing through and just kind of adding this where there are more of the shadows, like underneath this petal here or in the center of the petals, just a little bit here and a little bit there. And just make sure not to overdo it, just enough to add some contrast to help this flower pop a little bit. The spike too, because it has a little bit of a purple hue to it. Just this one does. Cleaning off my brush, now I'm going to add this rusty color, and I'm going to use kind of a darker version of it, but not super concentrated, so something kind of in the middle. Dab it off my towel and test it out on my test strip. And I think I go a little darker, so I'll pick up a little bit more of that and add it in. I like that color a lot better. So I'm dabbing it off on my towel before applying it to my painting. And then, as you can see, it's just mostly concentrated here at the tip. So I'm going to start at the tip and kind of move towards the green area in aligned motion since it's a little spiked. I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint, dab it on my towel again, and then add it to this spike here in aligned motion as well, starting at the top and moving down so that the paint just naturally ends up being a little lighter on the bottom, so towards the center area. And then all the little tubes are this reddish color too, so I'm going to paint those. And then there's a little bit of the reddish color in the inside, so I'm just going to add that. And if you get onto the petals like I did there, that's fine. And again, this is just a sketch. And lastly, I'm just going to add just one more layer of the violet in, just to give it just a little bit more contrast. If you have some really wet areas still, just wait to do this. So I'm just kind of adding it very sparingly in the darker areas, just to give these petals a little bit more pop. And I might have gone a little too dark, so I could have used a slightly lighter color, but that's fine. I still like it. And this petal, I added the red over it, so I'm just going to add purple over it to kind of mute that a little bit. Still show a representation of that petal. So it looks like there's a lot of shadow there, so that's fine. So I kind of perfectly imperfect mistake there. I think it looks fun having that dark area in the middle. I'm going to add a little bit in the spike as well because it will add some darker contrast in the middle as well. And I'm going to do the same thing with this spike. Just a little bit of this purple color over the top. And then clean off my brush and add some ink lines. I'm going to add ink lines. I'm going to start with the smallest tipped micron, the 005 black micron here. That way, if I make any mistakes, it'll be easy to cover up or fix with the darker, thicker lines. And just going to go ahead and basically redraw the lines I drew initially. And if you need to refer to your flower, you can. If you're just redrawing the same lines, that's fine. You can also redefine them based on where your paint fell, which is nice. So this is a sketch, it's not exact, and I mean, every time you move your head, it's going to change on like a photo. So it's fine to change things a little bit. And then you can make them a little more solid in the next step. And it looks like maybe I missed paint right in this petal here. So I can go back at any time and add some more paint to that petal. These are waterproof pens. As long as you're using a waterproof pen, you can do that. And if you think maybe it's a little bit too light, or you can always add more paint. It's a lot harder to take away the color. So if you work a little lighter, it's to your advantage for sure. And I have some white paper here, so I'm going to put that right up here so that I can see these leaves better and have a flat surface to draw on. It's a little bit better so that I can do this. This is the more detailed work. Again, not really being super exact about it. And if you miss some of the serrated edges, it's fine too. Again, something maybe you could note. So some paint outside the lines, and that's totally fine. And I'm just going to continue with this flower since I'm working on it, rather than moving on to the other one, and add some slightly darker lines. So again, using a slightly thicker micron, the 01 black micron, so a slightly thicker tip, and just adding a few darker lines around these petals, kind of here and there, sparingly, kind of like when we added some darker paint, just to help it pop a little bit. Anywhere that needs a little extra defining and separation from the other parts as well. So not a lot. I think that that's pretty good. And I missed some lines here, so I'm just going to redraw. I'm going to draw those in with the 1 micron too, using kind of a lighter touch. And then I'm going to move on to the 08 black micron. And this smudges, so just be careful not to put your hand in it. I'm going to add it into these darker areas to add a lot more contrast and definition. So this is just a sketch, so it's real rough. And every time I create a painting, it looks a little bit different. And I'm sure you'll find the same thing happens for you. This to the stem, the bottom of the stem, since that's where the shadow is, give it a little bit more shape and depth. Correct some of the thickness here because I made the lines a little bit different, and then also create some separation. Some of these leaf parts here, Again, being super rough, super fast, very messy. It's meant for you just to kind of relax and get an idea of this plant. Not get too carried away with getting it too perfect. Every mistake makes it perfectly yours and unique and beautiful. And so I like that the way this part looks. So I can put this paper down. And then I'm gonna go ahead while I have the 08 micron on me. I'm gonna be really careful not to smudge this, so I might put my reference image here so I don't smudge that. And I'm gonna write in the common name. And then I'm going to use the 01 micron to write in the scientific name. And lastly, I'm going to use that 005 black micron to redraw the lines of this bud. So I'm gonna just pick it up again and put it against my paper so that I can see it in a similar position as before. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and draw it. And this is where if you have your sketchbook, it might make it a little easier to have something a little hard and flat to draw on. So I'm redrawing those lines and drawing some new lines in that I'm seeing now. So you can feel free to add some things and don't worry too much about if you mess something up, that's fine. It's perfectly imperfect. Just go ahead and change it as needed. And you don't want it to be too pressed down too hard or it's just going to look flat. And just kind of just redraw all those lines. I like those initial lines there. And I might add just a few of these slightly darker lines. So maybe just right in here, but not a lot. And then take the 08 black micron for some final lines. And this is where you might want to have a little bit flatter surface, get really straight lines, and then if you don't have a flat surface like me, you may not get quite straight. It's a sketch, so it's kind of fun, these imperfect lines that are kind of jagged and all over the place. I think it adds a little more character. So I'm just kind of adding them to different areas to create a little bit more of a contrast, so that it pops more. So you don't want to add it to everything, just parts. The last thing, I think I forgot to put a little bit of paint here, so I'm just add a tiny dab of paint in there. Maybe a little bit dark paint to it. You can see it kind of float in there. And I'll show you, once you clean your brush off on your towel, you can actually pick some of that right up with your brush to lighten it. And I like how that looks. So now I'm done. Great job observing your world. Thank you for joining me today for this sketching lesson. If you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe to this channel. Check out naturesketchcrate.com for future lesson crates and to sign up for our newsletter for regular updates.